Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. You're lying in the dark, the ceiling just barely visible, the quiet thick enough that you can hear your own breathing. The world outside your window hums in low electrical tones, streetlights buzzing, distant traffic sighing, and inside your skull, something far stranger is happening than you ever imagined. For decades, scientists believed they understood what sleep was for: rest, repair, memory consolidation. Simple, comforting words. But recently, deep in the glow of laboratory monitors, researchers have watched something unfold in the sleeping brain that has made a few of them sit up straighter in their chairs. Because it turns out, while you think you're doing absolutely nothing, your brain might be doing something unsettlingly active. And here's the part that would make a survival instructor nervous. If this new discovery is fully confirmed, you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous in a dramatic, apocalyptic way, but because it suggests your brain is quietly rewriting parts of you every single night. Personality, memory, emotion. Subtle edits, like a sleepy librarian rearranging the shelves when you're not looking. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're drifting off from, whether it's 2:13 a.m. in Toronto or a suspiciously alert 9:47 p.m. in Sydney. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've always been told sleep is a passive state. The lights go out, consciousness powers down, and your body runs a few maintenance programs in the background, like a laptop installing updates you'll never read about. That story made sense. It felt safe. In fact, since the discovery of REM sleep in 1953 by Eugene Oserinsky and Nathaniel Kleitman, sleep science has followed a fairly tidy script. Cycles of light sleep, deeper slow-wave sleep, then rapid eye movement where dreams bloom in technicolor. Mainstream textbooks describe these stages like floors of a building you descend each night. Stage 1, drifting. Stage 2, steadying. Stage 3, deep, slow-wave sleep, the heavy, restorative stuff. Then REM, vivid dreams, darting eyes, a temporarily paralyzed body so you don't act out your midnight ninja fantasies. It's neat, organized, comforting. But what if that's not the whole story? The new discovery began, as many unsettling things do, with improved technology. Brain imaging tools have become so precise that scientists can now observe tiny fluctuations in neural activity, microbursts that older EEG machines would have smoothed over like static. When researchers started stacking this data across hundreds of sleepers, something strange emerged. Instead of a calm, gradually descending slope of activity in deep sleep, they saw sudden, coordinated surges. Not random noise, not glitches, patterns. Imagine thinking your house goes quiet every night, only to discover that at 3:17 a.m., all the lights flicker on for 12 seconds in perfect synchrony. That's roughly what they saw in the brain. Now here's a solid mainstream fact to anchor us. During deep sleep, your brain produces slow-wave oscillations, large synchronized waves of neural activity that roll across the cortex. These waves are associated with memory consolidation and physical restoration. That part is well established. But embedded within these slow waves, scientists recently detected high-frequency ripples, brief flashes of intense communication between the hippocampus and the cortex. The hippocampus, by the way, is your brain's memory librarian. It temporarily stores experiences before distributing them to long-term storage. For years, researchers believed these ripples simply replayed the day's events, strengthening neural connections like rehearsing piano scales. But here's where it gets uneasy. The patterns weren't always faithful replays. In some cases, the sequences appeared rearranged, altered, compressed, as though the brain wasn't just replaying events, it was experimenting with them. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced sleep in one long stretch or in two distinct phases, first sleep and second sleep, with a waking period in between. That debate reminds scientists today of a larger question. Have we misunderstood sleep structure all along? Is it less of a shutdown and more of a covert workshop? There's even a quirky tidbit from fringe neuroscience. A small group of researchers have speculated that dreams may function like evolutionary simulations, safe arenas where your brain tests alternate versions of reality. It sounds like science fiction, but it's rooted in observation. During REM sleep, where the amygdala, your emotional alarm center, lights up intensely, while the rational prefrontal cortex quiets down. It's like your brain hands the microphone to your inner dramatist and says, "Go wild." And it does. But the new discovery suggests that even outside REM, during the deepest, most unconscious sleep, your brain might be running subtle recalibrations, emotional tones dampened, certain synapses strengthened, others pruned. You go to bed as one slightly updated version of yourself and wake up as another. Not dramatically different. No overnight personality transplant. You're not waking up craving pineapple on pizza if you hated it yesterday. Relax. But statistically, microscopically, you are not identical to who you were before sleep. That's normal, of course. The brain is plastic. It changes constantly. What unsettles some scientists is the scale and precision of these nocturnal edits. The synchronized bursts suggest coordination across large brain networks. It's not random housekeeping. It's organized. And organization implies purpose. Evolutionary biologists have long puzzled over why sleep evolved at all. From a survival standpoint, it's risky. You're unconscious, vulnerable, occasionally drooling. Predators exist, weather exists. Your ancestors who nodded off in the wrong place did not exactly win Darwin Awards. They just didn't win at all. So why would natural selection preserve such a fragile state? The prevailing answer has been restoration and memory consolidation. But this new evidence hints at something more dynamic, active restructuring. The brain might need extended offline periods, not just to store memories, but to rebalance itself, to prevent overload, to retune emotional circuits. Which leads to the uncomfortable question, if sleep is constantly reshaping your neural pathways, how much of you is stable? Don't worry, you're not dissolving into cosmic goo every night. Identity is remarkably resilient, but think of it this way. If your brain didn't perform these edits, you might accumulate emotional static, traumas unprocessed, memories unintegrated. Sleep could be less like turning off a computer and more like running an advanced optimization algorithm. Still, when researchers first saw those midnight surges lighting up across the cortex, a few reportedly double-checked their equipment. Because brains aren't supposed to look that busy when you're deeply asleep, and yet they are. You're resting, your body is slack, your breathing is slow, but inside, billions of neurons are firing in elegant, coordinated patterns, like a silent orchestra performing a symphony you'll never consciously hear. The night is not empty, it's active, purposeful, and possibly far more transformative than anyone expected. You roll onto your side, unaware that in a few hours, microscopic changes will have subtly tuned your memories, nudged your emotions, maybe even softened yesterday's embarrassment, just enough to make tomorrow survivable. Sleep isn't just rest, it might be revision. And that realization, the idea that unconsciousness is when the deepest editing occurs, is exactly what has some scientists staring at their data with a mix of awe and unease. Because if the brain does its most profound work when you're not in control, what else might it be doing? You keep drifting. And as your breathing evens out, you imagine the tidy diagram you were taught in school, the one with the neat little staircase of sleep stages descending into the night. It felt so reassuring, didn't it? Like sleep was a well-organized hotel, and you simply checked into progressively quieter rooms. For most of the 20th century, scientists genuinely believed they had cracked the code. After REM sleep was identified in 1953, researchers mapped out the now famous architecture, a 90-minute cycle repeating 4 to 6 times per night. Stage 1, light and fluttery. Stage 2, marked by sleep spindles, those quick bursts of brain activity. Stage 3, slow wave sleep, deep and restorative. Then REM, where your eyes dart and dreams unfold like low-budget surrealist films written by your subconscious. That framework became foundational. It appears in textbooks, medical training, even smartwatch marketing. And to be fair, it's solid science. EEG readings reliably show distinct patterns in each stage. During slow-wave sleep, delta waves, big rolling, synchronized oscillations, dominate the brain. During REM, activity looks surprisingly similar to wakefulness, which is why it's sometimes called paradoxical sleep. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In the 1960s and 70s, sleep labs blossomed across universities, and researchers began waking participants during different stages. If someone was awakened during REM, they reported vivid dreams about 80% of the time. Woken during non-REM sleep, much lower dream recall. That helps cement the idea that REM equals dreaming, non-REM equals maintenance mode. Simple, elegant, publishable. Well, you can almost picture the early sleep labs. Dim rooms, tangles of wires glued to scalps, the faint smell of coffee and academic ambition. Volunteers lying there like mildly confused astronauts, science marching forward, and yet even then there were cracks. For instance, some people reported dreaming during non-REM sleep. Not as cinematic, perhaps, but still narrative. That didn't quite fit. Researchers noted it, shrugged a little, and moved on. Science sometimes does that. It bookmarks anomalies for later. Another long-held belief was that sleep's primary purpose was physical restoration. Growth hormone surges during deep sleep. Muscles repair. The immune system recalibrates. That's well documented. You've probably felt it yourself. After a terrible night's sleep, you're foggy, irritable, vaguely convinced the world is personally attacking you. But as neuroscience advanced, attention shifted to memory. The hippocampus, remember, temporarily holds new experiences. During sleep, especially slow-wave sleep, those memories were thought to transfer to the cortex for long-term storage. Think of it as moving files from your desktop to a well-organized archive. Sleep spindles, those quick bursts in stage 2, became associated with learning. Studies showed that people who exhibited more spindles after practicing a task, like a piano sequence, performed better the next day. That reinforced the consolidation model. Practice, sleep, improve. It's the academic version of, have you tried turning it off and on again? But here's where things start to wobble. As imaging technology improved in the 2000s, a scientist could observe not just surface EEG waves, but deeper structures in real time using functional MRI combined with electrophysiology. They expected confirmation of the classic model, hippocampus replays, cortex stores, done. Instead, they saw variability. Sometimes memory strengthened, sometimes they weakened, sometimes they subtly changed. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep, two distinct nightly sleeps separated by an hour of quiet wakefulness, was the norm before industrial lighting. If our ancestors experienced sleep differently, perhaps our entire model is skewed by modern schedules. After all, the 8-hour consolidated block is relatively recent in human history. And here's a quirky tidbit. In the 19th century, some physicians warned that too much sleep could overheat the brain. Completely wrong. And, of course, but it shows how mysterious sleep once seemed. We swung from fearing excess sleep to romanticizing productivity hacks that brag about surviving on 4 hours. Humans are very consistent at being inconsistent. Back to the lab, researchers began noticing micro-awakenings, tiny bursts where the brain briefly approaches wake-like activity for a few seconds before diving back down. These weren't dramatic enough to remember, but they were frequent. It suggested that sleep wasn't a smooth descent, but more like a series of subtle oscillations between states. Even more puzzling. During deep slow-wave sleep, when the brain is supposed to be globally synchronized and calm, certain regions would flare up in coordinated patterns. Not random firing, structured communication. Almost like committees holding meetings while the rest of the building is dark. The established theory struggled to explain that. If sleep was primarily for consolidation and restoration, why the complexity? Why the bursts? Some neuroscientists propose the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, which argues that wakefulness strengthens synapses across the brain and sleep scales them back down to prevent overload. Essentially, you spend the day turning up the volume on countless neural connections, and at night your brain lowers the gain so it doesn't fry itself. That theory gained traction because it elegantly explained why sleep deprivation impairs cognition. Without downscaling, your brain becomes noisy and inefficient. But the new discovery, the synchronized surges embedded within slow waves, doesn't look like simple downscaling. It looks selective, targeted, which raises a slightly unsettling possibility. Sleep might not just be cleaning up, it might be choosing winners and losers among your memories and emotional responses. Imagine your brain as a talent show judge while you snore. You, embarrassing middle school memory, you're getting quieter. You, skill I practiced today, you're getting amplified. It's less janitor, more editor-in-chief. And editors have opinions. There's even debate among scholars about whether memory consolidation during sleep is primarily about stabilization or transformation. Some argue it merely strengthens what already exists. Others believe it integrates memories into broader networks, subtly altering them in the process. Historians still argue whether eyewitness accounts from centuries past were shaped more by waking reinterpretation or by the quiet revisions of sleep. You see the tension forming. The classical model said sleep stages are discrete, predictable, purpose-driven. The new data suggests they're dynamic, overlapping, and possibly more creative than we assumed. As you lie there drifting further, your own brain cycles through stage 1. Muscles twitch, thoughts fragment. Stage 2 arrives with its spindles flickering like distant lightning. Then slow waves roll in, big and steady, and somewhere within those waves, tiny bursts of communication ripple between hippocampus and cortex. The old theory says, transfer and store. The new evidence whispers, modify and reframe. It's subtle, it's gradual, it's probably beneficial, but it's not passive. The sleep was supposed to be the most predictable biological rhythm you have. Instead, it's starting to look like the most sophisticated cognitive workshop you never attend. And that realization, that the foundational model might be incomplete, is what sets the stage for the moment when the data first looked undeniably wrong. Because when scientists zoomed in closer, what they saw wasn't just maintenance. It was something far more deliberate. The room grows quieter in your imagination now. The hum of distant traffic fading as if even the city has surrendered to slow-wave sleep. And inside your skull, you descend further, past the tidy textbook diagrams and into something stranger and more fluid. For years, one of the most celebrated discoveries in sleep science was something called the glymphatic system. If that name sounds like someone fell asleep on the keyboard, you're not alone. But it's real, and it changed neuroscience in a very big way. In 2012, researchers at the University of Rochester published a groundbreaking study showing that during sleep, the spaces between brain cells expand by up to 60%. Cerebrospinal fluid flows more freely through this expanded network, washing away metabolic waste, proteins like beta amyloid, which are associated with Alzheimer's disease. The brain, it turned out, had a nighttime cleaning crew. This was a mainstream, headline-grabbing revelation. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was sanitation. You can picture it. Billions of neurons finishing a long day of electrical chatter, stepping aside as clear fluid gently sweeps through, carrying away debris like a microscopic tide. It's oddly soothing. You drift off, and your brain quietly takes out the trash. And honestly, that discovery felt comforting. It explained why chronic sleep deprivation correlates with cognitive decline. It suggested a practical reason to value your pillow. It even gave you a mildly heroic excuse to cancel late-night plans. Sorry, I have to let my glymphatic system do its thing. But then came the part that made researchers squint at their screens. The glymphatic system is most active during deep slow-wave sleep, the same stage where those newly discovered synchronized neural surges were appearing. Initially, scientists assumed the two processes were simply coexisting, cleaning and consolidating, perfectly reasonable roommates. Yet high-resolution recordings began revealing something curious. The pulses of cerebrospinal fluid weren't random, yet they appeared rhythmically linked to the slow electrical waves sweeping across the cortex. In other words, the brain's cleaning cycles were synchronized with its electrical activity. That's not just housekeeping, that's choreography. Here's the mainstream fact. Slow-wave sleep is characterized by alternating up states and down states. During up states, neurons fire together. During down states, they fall nearly silent. These oscillations create a powerful rhythm across the brain. Recent imaging suggests that cerebrospinal fluid pulses in sync with these waves, almost as if the electrical silence creates a suction effect, drawing fluid inward. It's beautifully mechanical, elegant, like a tide responding to the moon. But embedded within those up states, the firing phases, scientists notice those high-frequency ripples again. Brief, precise bursts of communication between the hippocampus and cortex, cleaning and signaling, silence and surges. Historians still argue whether ancient physicians like Galen had any inkling that the brain produced fluid at all. For centuries, people believed humors governed thought and mood. Compared to that, modern neuroscience is dazzlingly advanced. And yet, even now, we're staring at patterns we don't fully understand. Some researchers began asking an uncomfortable question. What if the glymphatic system isn't just removing waste? What if it's also influencing neural plasticity? Fluid flow affects pressure. Pressure influences cellular behavior. Astrocytes, support cells in the brain, regulate this flow, and they also play roles in synaptic modulation. The boundaries between cleaning and editing begin to blur. There's even a quirky fringe hypothesis floating around certain conferences, usually after the third cup of coffee, that cerebrospinal fluid pulses might help coordinate large-scale neural timing, almost like a hydraulic metronome. It's speculative, yes, but the idea that fluid dynamics and electrical signaling are intertwined isn't absurd. Biology loves multitasking. As you sink deeper into imaginary slow-wave sleep, picture this. Vast neural populations fall silent together. Electrical activity dips. Fluid rushes in. Waste clears. Then during the firing phase, targeted ripples replay fragments of your day, your conversation, your frustration, that oddly satisfying sandwich. But instead of replaying events like a faithful recording, the ripples sometimes compress sequences. They skip steps. How's they emphasize certain details and ignore others? That's where scientists began feeling a flicker of unease. If sleep were purely restorative, you'd expect uniform processes, clean everything, downscale everything, stabilize everything. But the data suggests selectivity. Certain synapses strengthen, others weaken more aggressively. Emotional memories tied to fear sometimes diminish in intensity after REM sleep, while neutral facts remain stable, which means your brain is making decisions, not conscious decisions, not moral judgments, but algorithmic ones. Imagine leaving your house every night while an invisible committee reorganizes your library, discards some newspapers, highlights passages in others, and occasionally rewrites a sentence for clarity. You wake up thinking everything is exactly where you left it. Mostly it is. But not entirely. One landmark study showed that when participants learned a motor task and then slept, specific neural patterns reactivated during slow-wave sleep in compressed time, sometimes replaying a several-second sequence in under a second. That compression suggests efficiency, not just storage. And when researchers experimentally disrupted slow waves using gentle auditory stimulation, glymphatic flow decreased. Memory consolidation also suffered. The systems appear intertwined. Now here's the tension. If the cleaning process and the memory editing process are synchronized, is one driving the other? Or are they coordinated by a deeper mechanism we haven't identified? Historians still argue whether scientific revolutions are gradual evolutions or sudden paradigm shifts. In sleep science, one of this feels like the early tremor before something larger moves. You shift slightly in your imagined bed, your breathing deepens. Delta waves roll like distant thunder, fluid pulses through microscopic corridors, and within those oscillations, precise neural ripples stitch together pieces of your identity. The comforting version of this story says, your brain detoxifies and strengthens useful memories. The unsettling version whispers, your brain uses the quiet of sleep to recalibrate what matters. And here's the subtle, almost philosophical discomfort. If emotional tone can be reduced overnight, if certain associations weaken while others strengthen, then sleep isn't just maintenance. It's interpretation. It decides how strongly yesterday should echo into tomorrow. That might explain why a problem that felt catastrophic at 11 p.m. but feels manageable by morning. Why embarrassment dulls. Why grief softens incrementally. The glymphatic system clears metabolic waste, yes, but the synchronized neural choreography may also clear cognitive clutter, which sounds lovely until you realize it means the most profound editing of your inner world happens when you are entirely unaware. You trust it implicitly. You have to. There's no manual override switch labeled retain all memories exactly as encoded. And scientists, peering into this nocturnal ballet of fluid and electricity, are beginning to suspect that the cleaning crew might also be the architects. The brain doesn't just wash itself at night, it rearranges itself in the process. And that realization, this blending of sanitation and subtle transformation, is what made the first batch of anomalous lab data so difficult to dismiss. Because when the cleaning rhythms intensified under certain conditions, the memory ripples intensified too. And that was not in the textbook. You can almost see the lab now. Not the dramatic kind from science fiction, no glowing tubes or dramatic lightning strikes. Just a softly lit room, computer monitors casting a bluish glow, half-drunk mugs of coffee forming a protective ring around a keyboard. Outside, it's 2:43 a.m., which is either very late or very early, depending on how committed you are to your circadian rhythm. Inside, a graduate student leans closer to the screen because the data look wrong. At first, it's subtle. A cluster of slow-wave recordings from deep sleep sessions doesn't match the expected smooth oscillation pattern. Instead of a predictable rise and fall, there are spikes, tight, high-frequency bursts nested inside the broader delta waves. Now here's the mainstream fact anchoring this moment. Slow-wave sleep is dominated by delta waves between 0.5 and 4 Hz. These are large, synchronized oscillations across the cortex associated with restorative processes and memory consolidation. High-frequency activity, like gamma waves above 30 Hz, is typically linked to conscious processing, attention, and active cognition. Gamma waves are not supposed to show up prominently in deep, unconscious sleep, and yet there they are. The first assumption? Equipment glitch, electrodes misfiring, electrical interference from some nearby device. Wait, someone always blames the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is innocent, but it takes the blame with dignity. So the team recalibrates. They check impedance levels, they rerun the recordings, they analyze participants across multiple nights. The spikes persist. More intriguingly, they're not random. They appear at specific points in the slow wave cycle, often during the transition from the down state, when neurons fall silent, to the up state, when they fire together. It's as if the brain is using the silence as a reset button, then launching a precisely timed burst of communication. Historians still argue whether paradigm shifts in science are recognized in real time or only in hindsight. At that moment, staring at those anomalous traces, no one announces, "Ah, yes, we are witnessing a revolution." They just feel confused. And confusion in science is delicious. The researchers begin comparing these bursts to known phenomena. They resemble hippocampal sharp wave ripples, brief events previously associated with memory replay. But these new signals seem more globally coordinated, reaching wider cortical areas than expected. One experiment involves participants learning a complex spatial navigation task. Think virtual maze, minus the cheese. During subsequent sleep, the researchers detect ripple events that correspond to patterns recorded while navigating the maze earlier that day. So far, so textbook. But then they notice something strange. Some ripple sequences don't match the original experience exactly. Pathways are shortened, turns are rearranged. In a few cases, sequences appear that participants never actually performed, but are plausible alternative routes. Now we're in interesting territory. Is the brain simulating possibilities? There's a quirky tidbit from rodent research that adds fuel to this mystery. In maze studies, rats navigating a track show hippocampal place cells firing in specific sequences. During sleep, those sequences replay, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, and then occasionally in novel recombinations. Some neuroscientists have proposed that this pre-play might represent the brain rehearsing future actions. It sounds like your brain is quietly running beta tests while you drool on a pillow. When similar recombination patterns appear in human sleep data, the lab grows quiet in a different way. Because if deep sleep includes generative recombination, not just replay, then the old consolidation model is incomplete. You're not just preserving memory, you're experimenting with it. The implications start small. Maybe this explains creativity. After all, people have reported insight after sleep for centuries. Dmitry Mendeleev famously claimed the periodic table arrangement came to him in a dream. Historians still argue whether that story was embellished, but sleep-related insight is well documented in controlled studies. In one famous experiment, participants tasked with solving a hidden rule puzzle were more than twice as likely to discover the solution after a full night's sleep compared to staying awake. So yes, sleep enhances insight, but these ripple anomalies suggest something more granular. During slow-wave sleep, the deepest, much least conscious state, the brain may be recombining memory fragments into new configurations, testing associations, strengthening some links, weakening others. And this isn't happening in REM, the cinematic dream stage everyone loves to romanticize. It's happening in the dark, quiet basement of sleep. The researchers double-check statistical models. They compare across dozens of participants. The pattern holds. Gamma bursts nested within delta waves. Coordinated hippocampal cortical communication. Compressed, sometimes altered sequences. One skeptical colleague suggests it's epiphenomenal, an incidental byproduct of synaptic downscaling. Another counters that the timing is too precise, too structured. Historians still argue whether structure in biological systems always implies function, but in neuroscience, odd repeating patterns rarely mean nothing. You turn slightly in your imagined bed. Somewhere in your cortex, neurons fall silent in unison. A fraction of a second later, they ignite together. Within that ignition, high-frequency ripples flash, tiny conversations bridging distant regions. The old narrative said deep sleep is low activity. The data say otherwise. And then comes the part that really unsettles the room. When researchers selectively disrupted these ripple events in animal models using carefully timed electrical interference, memory performance the next day declined. Not dramatically, but measurably. Interrupt the ripples, impair the learning. That suggests causation, which means those anomalies aren't noise. They're necessary. Suddenly, the lab isn't looking at glitches. So it's looking at an underappreciated layer of cognitive processing hidden inside deep sleep. And if that layer is active, coordinated, and essential, then the comforting image of sleep as a mostly passive recovery state begins to dissolve. There's even a fringe hypothesis whispered in conference hallways that these ripple bursts represent a kind of internal predictive modeling engine, your brain's offline simulation network. It's speculative, yes, but not absurd. Waking cognition constantly predicts and updates. Why would sleep be any less sophisticated? The tension builds quietly. Because if the brain is simulating possibilities in deep sleep, altering memory traces in subtle ways, then identity itself is being tuned nightly by processes you never witness. You don't vote on which associations strengthen. You don't supervise the editing. One, you simply trust the system. And trust is easy until the data show the system is far more active than you thought. The graduate student leans back. The professor rubs their eyes. Another data set loads, and the same pattern appears again. Delta waves rolling like a calm ocean. Gamma bursts flickering like lightning within the tide. Not wrong, just unexpected. And sometimes in science, unexpected is the first word that precedes unsettling. Because if deep sleep contains hidden surges of generative neural activity, then the night isn't quiet at all. It's computational. And you, peacefully unaware, are running some of the most complex processing cycles of your life every single time you close your eyes. The night inside your mind is no longer a dark, silent cave. It's an ocean with hidden currents. And now the instruments have grown sensitive enough to detect the smallest ripples beneath the waves. You remain deep in slow-wave sleep, the stage once labeled nothing much happening. Delta waves roll in wide, synchronized arcs across your cortex. Neurons fall silent together, then surge back to life in a rhythm as old as mammalian evolution. But nestled inside those surges, researchers have identified something peculiar. Coordinated high-frequency bursts that don't just flicker locally, they travel. Mainstream neuroscience already recognizes sharp wave ripples in the hippocampus as crucial for memory consolidation. These events, typically around 100 to 200 hertz in rodents and slightly lower in humans, represent brief moments when neurons fire in tight synchrony. They've been studied for decades. What's new is the discovery that these ripples aren't isolated hippocampal whispers. They appear to synchronize with distant cortical regions far more extensively than previously believed. Imagine thinking your brain is hosting a small committee meeting only to realize it's actually a global conference call. High-density EEG arrays and intracranial recordings, often from epilepsy patients undergoing monitoring, have revealed ripple activity occurring almost simultaneously across multiple cortical areas during deep sleep. Not chaos, coordination. And coordination implies communication. Historians still argue whether the brain should be understood as modular, distinct regions with specialized functions, or as deeply networked and integrated. This new data leans heavily toward integration. During these ripple events, sensory areas, emotional centers, and executive regions appear briefly aligned, like orchestra sections hitting the same note. But what are they aligning about? One prevailing interpretation is that these signals help bind distributed aspects of a memory, sights, sounds, feelings, into cohesive long-term representations. That fits comfortably within existing models. Yet the timing raises questions. The ripple bursts often occur immediately after the cortical down state, when widespread neurons have fallen quiet. It's almost as if silence sets the stage for precision. You can picture it, billions of cells resting in stillness, then snap, an exquisitely timed flash of synchronized firing spreads like a spark through dry grass. Brief, intense, gone. Hammer hears the unsettling wrinkle. The spatial extent of these bursts suggests they may not be limited to specific memories learned that day. In some studies, ripple-linked cortical activity includes regions unrelated to the experimental task. That opens the door to a larger possibility. Maybe the brain is not just replaying yesterday. Maybe it's recalibrating networks more broadly. There's a quirky tidbit from sleep research in zebra finches. Yes, birds are involved now, because of course they are. When young finches learn songs, their brain circuits replay song patterns during sleep. But researchers noticed variations creeping into those replays, subtle shifts that refine the melody over time. It's not just repetition, it's refinement. Translate that to humans, and the idea becomes profound. Perhaps during slow-wave sleep, your brain doesn't merely preserve information, it tweaks it, optimizes it, integrates it into a broader predictive model of the world. And prediction is everything in neuroscience. Modern theories suggest your brain is fundamentally a prediction engine, constantly generating expectations and adjusting them based on incoming data. During the day, sensory input dominates. At night, with external input largely shut down, internal models can run freely. Historians still argue whether dreaming primarily reflects random neural firing or meaningful simulation. But these ripple findings shift part of that debate into non-REM sleep, the stage once thought to be dreamless and dull. You are not conscious of these bursts. You feel nothing. No flashes of insight, no internal fireworks. If anything, you look deeply, almost comically peaceful. Meanwhile, inside, networks are briefly synchronizing at high speed. Now here's where scientists start to exchange cautious glances. When ripple events are especially strong or frequent, next-day performance on certain cognitive tasks can improve. Not just rote memory, but pattern recognition and abstraction. It suggests that something beyond storage is happening. Abstraction means extracting general rules from specific examples. That's higher-order processing. That's not just filing paperwork. And if the brain is extracting rules in deep sleep, that means it is restructuring knowledge hierarchies while you're offline. There's even early evidence that emotional tone shifts correlate with ripple activity in networks involving the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. That means emotional calibration might be linked to these precise electrical storms. You go to bed furious about an awkward interaction. You wake up mildly annoyed instead. Somewhere in the delta-gamma choreography, your brain decided that rage was excessive, convenient, also slightly unnerving. Because who authorized that edit? There's a fringe speculation, still very much debated, that these ripple bursts might represent micro moments of integrated consciousness, too brief to register subjectively, tiny sparks of unified processing that don't rise to awareness but still perform computation. It's speculative, yes, but the idea that consciousness exists on a spectrum rather than as a strict on/off switch is gaining traction. Historians still argue whether consciousness should be viewed as binary or graded. Sleep research increasingly suggests graded states, microarousals, partial activations, fleeting integrations. So maybe you're not entirely off in deep sleep. Maybe you're intermittently flickering, not awake, not aware, but active. The data keep accumulating. Labs across the world replicate similar patterns. Slow waves providing the scaffolding, ripples delivering the precision strikes. And the phrase passive rest starts to feel embarrassingly outdated. You remain still in the dark. You're breathing slow, your muscles slack. If someone looked at you now, they'd assume nothing of consequence is happening. But beneath the surface, synchronized bursts are sweeping across neural landscapes, binding information, testing patterns, recalibrating emotional weights. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's surgical. And what unsettles some scientists isn't that the brain is active at night. That's old news now. It's that the activity appears strategic, selective, purpose-driven, which implies that each night, without your supervision, your brain is deciding what to keep, what to soften, what to strengthen, and possibly what to reinterpret. That's a lot of authority to hand over to an unconscious process. Yet you do it every night without hesitation. Because you have to. Because without these coordinated bursts, without this hidden symphony of slow waves and ripples, the next day would feel fragmented and heavy. Still, the realization lingers in the lab air, like static before a storm. Deep sleep isn't quiet. It's orchestrated. And the orchestra is playing something far more complex than anyone expected. By now, on the night inside your skull feels less like a blackout and more like a covert editing studio. The slow waves roll in broad, patient rhythms, and tucked inside them, those high-frequency ripples keep flashing like tiny red recording lights. And this is where things get personal, because if ripple bursts help reorganize memory networks, then the obvious next question is, are they preserving your memories exactly as they happened, or subtly rewriting them? You've probably heard the mainstream fact that memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Psychologists have known for decades that recalling an event changes it. Elizabeth Loftus's research in the 1970s famously demonstrated how easily false memories can be implanted with simple wording changes. A memory is less like a video file and more like a story you retell, slightly different each time. That's during wakefulness. Now imagine what happens when memory traces are reactivated during sleep, when your prefrontal cortex, the rational, fact-checking part of your brain, is less active. During slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus replays fragments of recent experiences. That part is well established. But as we've seen, those replays aren't always perfect duplicates. They're compressed, sometimes rearranged, occasionally merged with older memory networks, which leads to what some researchers cautiously call the memory rewriting hypothesis. The idea isn't that your brain fabricates entirely new paths every night. Relax, you didn't secretly become a pirate captain in 2014. It's subtler than that. The hypothesis suggests that during sleep, reactivated memories become temporarily labeled, open to modification, before being stored again. Think of it like opening a document to skim it, making a small edit, and then saving over the original file. Historians still argue whether autobiographical memory can ever be fully accurate, even immediately after an event. If memory is inherently malleable, then sleep might be one of the primary windows during which that malleability is expressed. Here's where it gets fascinating. In controlled experiments, researchers have paired specific sounds or smells with learning tasks. Later during sleep, they subtly reintroduce those cues without waking participants. The result? Memory for the cued material improved compared to uncued material. That's called targeted memory reactivation. It demonstrates that sleeping brains can be nudged, gently steered, towards strengthening particular memories. Now pause and let that sink in. If memories can be selectively enhanced during sleep with external cues, then the sleeping brain is not only active, it's receptive. And if enhancement is possible, could dampening be possible too? In fact, some studies suggest yes. There's evidence that emotional intensity associated with memories can decrease after REM sleep. Activity between the amygdala, your emotional alarm bell, and the prefrontal cortex changes overnight, often reducing the emotional charge of distressing experiences. You go to bed mortified. You wake up merely embarrassed. Convenient feature. 5 stars. But the new Ripple findings imply that this modulation may begin even earlier, during non-REM deep sleep. The coordinated Ripple events link hippocampal memory traces with cortical, emotional, and conceptual networks. That means when a memory is replayed, it's not replayed in isolation. It's integrated. Integration can mean strengthening. It can also mean reinterpretation. There's a quirky tidbit from trauma research. Some clinicians have observed that sleep disturbances are strongly associated with PTSD. Historians still argue whether disrupted REM sleep is a cause or consequence of trauma disorders. But one possibility is that if normal sleep-dependent emotional recalibration fails, traumatic memories remain raw and intrusive, which suggests sleep isn't just preserving memories, it's smoothing them. But here's the part that makes certain scientists shift in their chairs. If sleep can dampen emotional tone, when could it also subtly reshape narrative meaning? Imagine a mildly awkward social interaction. During the day, you interpret it as catastrophic. During sleep, that memory reactivates. Ripple events synchronize it with broader networks, past social successes, contextual knowledge, your general sense of self-worth. By morning, the memory is still there, but it's less central, less threatening. That's healthy recalibration. But it also means the you who wakes up is not experiencing the event in the same raw way as the you who went to bed. And the edits happen unconsciously. There's even early debate about whether creativity gains after sleep stem from this rewriting process. When participants are presented with complex problems, sleep increases the likelihood of discovering hidden patterns. Some neuroscientists propose that during ripple-linked reactivation, the brain weakens rigid associations and strengthens broader, more abstract connections. In other words, sleep loosens the mental knots you tied during the day. Historians still argue whether genius insights credited to dreams were truly born in sleep or simply recognized upon waking. But laboratory data clearly show sleep enhances abstraction and generalization. That's not just storage, that's transformation. You lie there unaware. A memory from earlier, maybe a conversation, maybe something you read, reactivates in compressed form. The hippocampus fires a quick sequence. The cortex responds. Emotional centers flicker. The sequence isn't identical. It's slightly reweighted. Perhaps a detail becomes less prominent. Perhaps a pattern becomes clearer. Perhaps a stray association links to an older memory you hadn't thought about in years. When you wake up, you don't notice the micro adjustments. You just feel updated. There's a fringe speculation, still controversial, that if sleep processes go awry, subtle distortions in memory integration could contribute to certain psychiatric conditions. Not dramatic rewrites, but cumulative biases in how experiences are weighted and linked. It's a reminder that this nightly editing system is powerful. Usually it serves you beautifully, but power without awareness always carries a hint of unease, because your brain is not asking for permission to reinterpret. It simply does. The memory rewriting hypothesis doesn't claim you're unreliable or fabricated. It suggests something more nuanced. Identity is iterative. Each night, through ripple synchronized reactivation, your brain refines the narrative you carry forward. You wake up feeling continuous, stable, consistent, and you are. But beneath that stability lies a process of quiet revision, like a manuscript revised line by line in the dark. And the realization that the most intimate parts of your story are gently edited while you're unconscious. That's the discovery making some scientists pause. Because sleep may not just protect your memories. It may be authoring them. If deep sleep is the editing room, then dreaming might be the rehearsal stage. You drift upward now out of the heavy, tide-like pull of slow waves and into the flickering, unstable landscape of REM sleep. Your eyes dart beneath closed lids. Your breathing grows irregular. Your muscles are temporarily paralyzed, a safety feature evolution installed so you don't physically act out your midnight adventures. Very considerate of it. Mainstream neuroscience has long established that REM sleep is when the brain looks most like it's awake. EEG readings show low amplitude, mixed frequency activity. The visual cortex lights up. The amygdala, the emotional amplifier, flares with activity. Meanwhile, parts of the prefrontal cortex responsible for logic and self-monitoring quiet down, which explains why in dreams you'll calmly accept that your childhood home is floating in space and your math teacher is also a giraffe. No offense to giraffes. REM sleep was once thought to be primarily about dreaming, and dreaming was once thought to be mostly nonsense. Random neural firing stitched into narrative by a bored cortex, when that was the activation synthesis hypothesis proposed in the 1970s. Historians still argue whether dreams carry inherent meaning or are just interpretive noise layered over brainstem activity. But modern research has complicated the random nonsense idea, because dreams aren't entirely random. They're patterned. When researchers wake participants during REM sleep, about 80 to 90% report vivid dreams. These dreams often incorporate recent experiences, sometimes directly, sometimes symbolically. A stressful exam becomes a dream about missing a train. An awkward conversation morphs into a surreal courtroom scene. The content is distorted, yes, but it's not arbitrary. And here's where the new sleep discovery threads into dreaming. If ripple bursts in deep sleep help reorganize memory fragments, REM sleep might be where those fragments are stress tested in simulated scenarios. There's a growing body of evidence supporting what's called the threat simulation theory. The idea suggests that dreaming evolved as a safe environment for rehearsing dangerous or socially complex situations. In dreams, you practice fleeing, arguing, solving, navigating, without real-world consequences. Convenient sandbox mode for the brain. One mainstream fact: during REM sleep, the amygdala is highly active while stress hormones like norepinephrine are suppressed. That combination allows emotional memories to be reactivated without the full physiological stress response. You revisit fear, but in a chemically softened context. It's like replaying a horror movie with the volume turned down. But here's the twist. Recent neuroimaging suggests that REM isn't isolated from non-REM processes. The ripple events from deep sleep appear to set the stage, selecting which memory fragments are primed. Then REM integrates them into broader associative networks. In other words, deep sleep may curate the pieces, and REM may explore the combinations. That's not passive dreaming. That's neural experimentation. There's a quirky tidbit from a 2010 study. Participants trained on a complex visual task improved significantly after sleep, but only if their dreams incorporated elements of the task. Those who dreamed about the task performed better than those who didn't, even if total sleep time was the same. Dream content predicted learning, which suggests dreaming isn't just decorative, it's functional. Historians still argue whether ancient cultures were closer to the truth about dreams than early modern scientists. Many indigenous traditions view dreams as meaningful rehearsals or guidance. Modern neuroscience might be circling back, not mystically, but mechanistically. When you dream, your brain combines memory fragments, emotional tones, and abstract concepts in novel ways. The reduced prefrontal oversight allows unusual associations to form. That's why dreams are bizarre, but also why they can be creative. If deep sleep edits, REM improvises. And improvisation is how systems discover new solutions. Consider this. Problem-solving performance often improves after REM-rich sleep. In one experiment, participants working on anagram puzzles were significantly more likely to discover hidden rules after REM periods. Brain scans suggested increased connectivity between distant regions during REM. That's integration. Now layer this onto the ripple discovery. If ripple bursts select and reshape memory traces in slow-wave sleep, then dreaming might be the stage where those reshaped traces interact dynamically. A slightly softened emotional memory meets a distant conceptual network. A new link forms. By morning, you feel like you've processed something. You haven't consciously done anything. You were busy riding a dream bicycle through a library made of clouds, and yet something changed. There's even speculation, still debated, that REM sleep plays a role in emotional regulation disorders. Reduced REM density has been linked to depression. Excessive REM fragmentation appears in certain anxiety conditions. Historians still argue whether REM abnormalities are causes or consequences of mood disorders, but if dreaming functions as emotional recalibration, disruptions could matter deeply. The new discovery doesn't claim dreams are prophetic or magical. It suggests something subtler and perhaps more impressive. Dreaming is structured experimentation built on carefully selected neural material. You're not just watching strange movies at night. You're running simulations. Simulations that test emotional responses, simulations that blend memory fragments, simulations that might prepare you for tomorrow's uncertainties. And here's the slightly unsettling realization. Simulations don't merely replay the past. They project possible futures. If your brain is constantly simulating variations, testing outcomes, rehearsing reactions, then part of your overnight transformation involves shaping expectations. Expectation shapes perception. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior shapes identity. All while you snore gently into a pillow, you remain unaware of the combinatorial fireworks behind your eyelids. The amygdala flares and softens. The cortex weaves unlikely connections. The hippocampus releases fragments into the mix. Deep sleep curated. REM experiments. Together, they form a two-stage process of nocturnal recalibration, and if that process is more creative than we assumed, more generative, more selective, then the line between memory consolidation and imagination becomes thinner than we thought. Sleep isn't just storing yesterday, it's rehearsing tomorrow, which raises a new, slightly delicious question. If the brain is this active, watch this generative, this computational while unconscious, what else might it be capable of during the night? You drift again, cycling downward, the REM fireworks fading into the deeper, steadier rhythm of slow-wave sleep. And just when everything feels calm, predictable, tidal, safe, another layer of strangeness appears. Because alongside those ripple bursts, researchers have identified something even more puzzling. Brief surges of energy across widespread brain networks during the deepest phases of sleep. Not chaotic spikes, not seizures, structured surges. Mainstream neuroscience has long described deep sleep as metabolically reduced. Brain glucose consumption drops compared to wakefulness. Overall neural firing slows. It's economical, efficient, like dimming the lights to conserve power. But high-resolution metabolic imaging, particularly with advanced fMRI and intracranial monitoring, has revealed transient increases in activity in specific networks during slow-wave sleep. These aren't sustained wake-like states. They're bursts, seconds long, coordinated. The first time researchers noticed them, they assumed artifact. Again, science is humble that way. It assumes it's wrong before assuming reality is weird. But the bursts replicated, across participants, across labs, and they seem to align with those ripple events. Historians still argue whether the brain should be viewed primarily as an energy-minimizing organ or as a prediction-maximizing one. These surges complicate both narratives. Why would an energy-conscious system spike activity during its most energy-saving phase, unless the spikes serve a critical function? One mainstream fact: the brain consumes about 20% of the body's energy while awake, an enormous amount for a 3-pound organ. During deep sleep, that consumption decreases, but not uniformly. Certain regions, especially those involved in memory and integration, show patterned reactivation. Now imagine this: a city at night. Most buildings are dark, streets are quiet, but occasionally entire districts flicker on briefly. Lights, servers, communication lines, all synchronized, then silent again. That's what these energy surges resemble. And here's the unsettling twist. The magnitude of some surges rivals waking activity levels, but in tightly confined windows. It's like your brain briefly shifts into high gear while the rest of you is completely offline. There's a quirky parallel from marine biology. It's dolphins sleep with one hemisphere of their brain at a time, a phenomenon called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. One side rests while the other remains alert enough to surface for air. Historians still argue how early mammals evolved diverse sleep strategies, but it's clear sleep is flexible across species. Humans don't sleep one hemisphere at a time, at least not in the same way. But these newly observed surges suggest that even in full, slow-wave sleep, localized networks can transiently ignite, while the global brain remains in a low-frequency state. Local wakefulness inside global sleep. That phrase alone makes neuroscientists blink. Some researchers propose that these energy bursts may facilitate large-scale network recalibration, resetting synchronization thresholds, fine-tuning connectivity strength. Can think of it as rebooting subsystems while the main system is powered down. But others wonder whether something more computational is happening, because when the bursts are analyzed closely, they often precede ripple events or follow them in precise timing windows. That sequence, surge, ripple, integration, resembles a processing pipeline, and pipelines imply steps. Steps imply design, not conscious design, of course, evolutionary design. But still, you lie there, deeply asleep. Delta waves roll. For several seconds, activity remains low and synchronized. Then suddenly a network linking hippocampus, medial prefrontal cortex, and posterior cingulate cortex flares in coordinated activation. That network, by the way, overlaps heavily with the default mode network, the system associated with self-referential thinking during wakefulness. Yes, the thinking about yourself network. Why would that network spike during deep unconscious sleep? Historians still argue whether the default mode network represents narrative selfhood or merely idle brain activity, but its involvement during these bursts hints that self-referential processing may not fully shut off at night. Perhaps identity maintenance is ongoing. There's also evidence that these surges correlate with heart rate variability shifts and subtle breathing changes, tiny physiological echoes of internal neural events. Your body, it seems, responds to these microstorms even if you never notice. And here's where some scientists grow uneasy. When individuals are sleep-deprived, the next recovery night often shows exaggerated slow-wave activity, what's called sleep rebound. In some data sets, odd ripple events and associated energy surges become more intense during rebound nights. It's as if the brain compensates aggressively, which suggests the processes linked to those surges are not optional. They're necessary. There's even a fringe speculation, still very early, that these bursts may contribute to large-scale synaptic renormalization beyond simple downscaling. Instead of merely turning the volume down on all connections, the brain may selectively amplify some while suppressing others, recalibrating entire network hierarchies. That's not housekeeping. That's restructuring. You remain peacefully unaware, your face relaxed, your limbs still. From the outside, you are the picture of biological quiet. Inside, short-lived storms flare across cortical networks. Energy spikes, synchrony tightens, ripple events cascade, and then silence again. The pattern repeats dozens, perhaps hundreds of times across the night. What unsettles researchers isn't that the brain works during sleep. That's old news. It's the intensity and precision of these bursts. The fact that deep sleep, once considered the most passive state, contains some of the most coordinated neural events observed. If waking consciousness feels like the brain's main performance, deep sleep is starting to look like the dress rehearsal, or maybe the engineering meeting. The realization grows slowly. Sleep may be less about shutting down and more about strategic cycling between global synchronization and local high-speed computation. And if that's true, then the brain's most energy-demanding recalibrations happen precisely when you are least aware of them. Which makes you wonder, if these surges are essential for stability, what happens when they don't occur? If those midnight surges are essential, if ripple bursts and energy spikes are part of a delicate recalibration system, then depriving yourself of sleep should disrupt that system in predictable ways. And it does, but not always the way you'd expect. You've probably heard the mainstream fact that sleep deprivation impairs cognitive performance. Reaction times slow, attention falters, mood deteriorates. After about 24 hours without sleep, cognitive impairment can resemble a blood alcohol level of 0.10%. In other words, pulling an all-nighter makes your brain behave as if it's tipsy, without the fun karaoke confidence. That part is solid science. But here's where things get weird. In certain controlled studies, short-term sleep restriction has produced temporary improvements in very specific cognitive tasks, particularly in people with depression. Acute sleep deprivation can produce rapid, though usually short-lived, antidepressant effects. Mood lifts, rumination decreases, energy rises. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon was first noticed clinically or accidentally, but it's been documented for decades. Roughly 40 to 60% of patients with major depressive disorder show transient improvement after a night of total sleep deprivation. That is deeply counterintuitive. If sleep is restorative and emotionally regulating, why would skipping it sometimes improve mood? One theory suggests that depression may involve maladaptive overnight processing, perhaps overly rigid or negatively biased memory integration. If sleep normally recalibrates emotional tone, but does so in a skewed way for certain individuals, then interrupting that process could temporarily disrupt the negative cycle. In other words, if the editing system is biased, skipping an editing session might briefly preserve a more neutral draft. But that relief rarely lasts. Once normal sleep resumes, symptoms often return. Now consider performance tasks. In some experiments involving simple repetitive tasks, sleep-deprived individuals initially show heightened focus, likely due to stress hormones and adrenaline. Cortisol levels rise. The brain compensates. For a short window, certain circuits operate in overdrive. You've probably felt this. The wired clarity at 3 a.m. when exhaustion and caffeine join forces in a chaotic alliance. But it's unstable. Functional MRI studies reveal that after sleep deprivation, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, shows reduced activity, while more primitive emotional and reward circuits become hyperactive. The rational supervisor clocks out early. The impulsive intern takes over. And here's where it intersects with the new sleep discovery. When people are chronically sleep deprived, slow-wave activity during subsequent recovery sleep intensifies dramatically. Ripple density increases, energy surges grow more pronounced. The brain appears to catch up. That rebound suggests the process is occurring during deep sleep. Those synchronized bursts and ripple events are not optional luxuries. They are biologically mandatory. Skip them, and the system demands repayment. There's a quirky tidbit from military sleep research. Soldiers subjected to prolonged wakefulness begin experiencing microsleeps, brief involuntary lapses into sleep lasting seconds, sometimes with localized slow-wave activity in parts of the brain while the person appears awake. Local sleep intrudes into wakefulness. Historians still argue whether consciousness is an all-or-nothing phenomenon, but microsleeps strongly suggest it's not. Portions of the brain can slip offline independently, and during these microsleeps, EEG recordings sometimes show patterns resembling slow-wave bursts, the very oscillations linked to ripple events and recalibration. It's as if the brain insists on performing maintenance, even in the middle of a conversation. Polite? No. Necessary? Apparently. Now here's the paradox. While acute deprivation can briefly sharpen certain narrow functions, complex reasoning, emotional regulation, and memory integration degrade steadily. After about 36 hours awake, hallucinations may begin. The boundary between internal simulation and external perception blurs. That's a clue. If sleep is partly about managing internal simulations, organizing memory, recalibrating predictions, then depriving the brain of that offline simulation time could cause those processes to leak into wakefulness. Dream logic starts seeping into reality, which is mildly concerning if you're trying to operate heavy machinery. There's also evidence that chronic sleep restriction, even just 5 or 6 hours per night over weeks, leads to cumulative cognitive deficits. Participants often believe they're adapting, but objective testing shows steady decline. Your subjective sense of "I'm fine" becomes unreliable. And that's perhaps the most unsettling piece. The brain's self-assessment systems are themselves compromised without sleep. So if deep sleep surges and ripple events are part of a nightly calibration loop, adjusting memory, emotion, prediction, then skipping them may distort not just performance, but perception of performance. You think you're functioning normally. You're not. The new discovery adds another layer. If ripple density and synchronized bursts are reduced by deprivation, then the brain's ability to reorganize memory networks may falter. Emotional intensity might remain elevated. Patterns might not integrate cleanly. Over time, that could contribute to anxiety, irritability, cognitive rigidity. Historians still argue whether modern society's chronic sleep restriction is unprecedented in scale. Artificial light, screens, shift work, these are recent evolutionary developments. Our brains evolved under conditions of darkness and relative regularity. Now we override that system nightly. You lie there imagining a future where sleep is optional, optimized, hacked, minimized. It sounds efficient, productive, very on-brand for modern ambition. But the data whispers something else. Sleep is not idle time. It's recalibration time. And when you interrupt recalibration, the system destabilizes in subtle ways before dramatic ones. The paradox of sleep deprivation, that brief spikes of alertness can mask deeper dysfunction, mirrors the hidden activity of deep sleep itself. On the surface, nothing seems urgent. Underneath, critical processes are unfolding. And if the brain must generate rebound surges to compensate for lost nights, that means those midnight bursts are as essential as breathing, which raises an evolutionary question that scientists are still wrestling with. Why would a species evolve a state so vulnerable, so metabolically strange, and so computationally intense? What advantage could possibly justify spending a third of your life unconscious? If sleep is this intricate, this computationally dense and biologically essential, then evolution must have had a very good reason to keep it around. Because from a survival standpoint, sleep looks ridiculous. You lie down. You close your eyes. You lose awareness of your surroundings for hours. You become slower to respond, less alert, occasionally immobile. For early humans on open savannas, and this was not exactly a winning strategy, and yet every mammal studied so far sleeps in some form. Even fruit flies exhibit sleep-like states. Deprive them long enough, and they rebound with increased rest. Sleep, or something very much like it, appears across the animal kingdom. Mainstream evolutionary biology suggests that if a behavior is conserved across species, especially at metabolic cost, it likely serves a fundamental function. Sleep consumes time that could otherwise be spent foraging, reproducing, or staying vigilant. So why would natural selection protect it? One long-standing theory is energy conservation. During sleep, body temperature drops slightly. Metabolic rate decreases. In environments where food scarcity was common, conserving calories overnight might have offered an advantage. But that explanation doesn't fully satisfy researchers anymore. The energy saved during sleep is modest, around 5 to 10% compared to quiet wakefulness. Helpful, yes, but not enough to justify complete unconsciousness in predator-rich environments. Another theory centers on restoration. Cellular repair processes, immune regulation, and growth hormone release all peak during deep sleep. That's solid mainstream science. Athletes deprived of sleep show slower muscle recovery. Immune response weakens without sufficient rest. Yet even restoration doesn't fully explain the complexity we've been exploring. The ripple bursts, the synchronized surges, the elaborate dream simulations. Historians still argue whether early humans slept in one consolidated block or in segmented phases. First sleep and second sleep, with a quiet waking interval in between. Pre-industrial records suggest segmented sleep was common. That hints that sleep architecture may be flexible, shaped by ecological pressures. Flexibility implies adaptability, and adaptability implies purpose beyond simple shutdown. Here's where evolutionary theory intersects with the new discovery. If deep sleep hosts coordinated neural recalibration, memory integration, emotional modulation, predictive modeling, then sleep may have evolved primarily as a cognitive optimization state. You spend the day collecting raw data. At night, you process it. In environments where survival depended on learning complex social cues, tracking seasonal changes, remembering safe routes, and predicting threats, a brain that could reorganize information offline would have a massive advantage. Imagine two early humans. One sleeps lightly and briefly, preserving vigilance but performing minimal neural integration. The other sleeps deeply, engaging in ripple synchronized recalibration that refines memory and prediction. Over time, the second individual may navigate social hierarchies better, avoid repeated mistakes, anticipate danger more accurately. That's survival. There's a quirky tidbit from migration studies in birds. Some species can sleep with half their brain while flying, maintaining aerodynamic control. But when they land, they exhibit intense rebound, slow-wave sleep, especially in the hemisphere that remained awake. It's as if even evolution's most efficient hacks cannot eliminate the need for deep recalibration. Historians still argue whether sleep originated primarily for metabolic housekeeping or for neuroplasticity. Increasingly, the evidence leans toward plasticity as central. Plasticity means change. Change means adaptability. And adaptability is evolution's favorite currency. The Ripple discovery strengthens this view. If high-frequency bursts during slow-wave sleep selectively reorganize memory networks, then sleep is not just preserving experience. It's optimizing it for future utility. You're not just remembering where the berries were. You're abstracting patterns. Which terrain types tend to yield food? Which facial expressions signal cooperation or threat? Which times of day are safest to travel? Abstraction is powerful. Abstraction requires integration across experiences. Integration appears to happen during sleep. Now add REM simulation on top of that, running potential scenarios, rehearsing emotional responses in a chemically safe environment. Evolution may have stumbled upon something extraordinary, a way to use unconsciousness as a sandbox for predictive modeling. Instead of reacting only in real time, your ancestors' brains could refine internal models offline, reducing costly mistakes during waking life. And here's the subtle but profound shift in perspective. Sleep may not have evolved despite its vulnerability. It may have evolved because the cognitive advantage outweighed the physical risk. Early humans likely mitigated vulnerability socially, sleeping in groups, taking turns keeping watch, choosing protected locations. Cultural adaptations buffered biological necessity, which suggests that deep, coordinated sleep was important enough to protect. You lie there in the dark, secure in walls and locks, benefiting from an evolutionary inheritance that demanded nightly surrender for long-term gain. The new discovery, those synchronized surges and ripple bursts, adds weight to the idea that sleep is a high-priority neural recalibration state, not optional, not secondary, primary. There's even emerging research suggesting that species with more complex social structures tend to have more elaborate sleep architectures. Correlation isn't causation, of course. Historians still argue whether complexity drives sleep patterns or vice versa, but the pattern is intriguing. More complexity, more need for integration, more structured sleep, and perhaps more intricate ripple choreography. The vulnerability of sleep begins to look less like a flaw and more like a trade-off, a strategic pause in external awareness to enhance internal organization. How you close your eyes, surrendering vigilance, but in doing so, you activate one of the most sophisticated computational processes evolution ever produced. The night isn't wasted time, it's adaptive refinement. And if sleep is central to predictive modeling, if it tunes your expectations and emotional responses, then the next question becomes even more curious. How do other animals manage this process? Do they recalibrate like you do? Or have they evolved entirely different strategies for navigating the night? If sleep is an evolutionary investment, an expensive but powerful recalibration state, then looking at other animals is like flipping through alternate design prototypes. Nature rarely sticks to one blueprint. You imagine the ocean first. A dolphin glides just beneath the surface, one eye open, one hemisphere of its brain asleep. When this is called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, and it's one of the most elegant compromises evolution has engineered. Mainstream fact: dolphins and some other marine mammals sleep with only one half of their brain at a time. The sleeping hemisphere shows slow-wave activity, while the other remains alert enough to control breathing and monitor for threats. After a few hours, they switch sides. It's like alternating night shifts inside your own skull. Humans can't do that, not in any functional way. When you enter deep, slow-wave sleep, both hemispheres synchronize. Global delta waves roll across the cortex. But the dolphin raises an interesting question. If one hemisphere can recalibrate while the other remains vigilant, Does that mean the core purpose of slow-wave sleep can be localized? Historians still argue whether unihemispheric sleep evolved primarily for predator avoidance or for maintaining motor control in water. Probably both. But its existence suggests that the essential features of deep sleep, those slow oscillations and ripple bursts, can operate regionally. And that aligns with what researchers see in humans during microsleeps and localized slow-wave events. Now look at elephants. In captivity, African elephants sleep about 4 to 6 hours per day. In the wild, sometimes as little as 2 hours. Some evidence suggests they may even go longer stretches without typical deep sleep when migrating or under threat. 2 hours. And here you are needing 7 or 8 to function without turning into a mildly irritated gremlin. What gives? One theory is that elephants may enter intense, when highly efficient, slow-wave sleep during those brief periods, maximizing recalibration. Another possibility is that their neural architecture distributes processing differently across wake and rest states. Historians still argue whether reported minimal sleep durations in large mammals are fully accurate or influenced by measurement limitations. Field data can be messy. Elephants are not always cooperative research participants. Then there are birds. Certain migratory birds can fly for days, engaging in brief episodes of unihemispheric sleep mid-flight. Yet when they land, they exhibit rebound slow-wave activity, stronger, deeper oscillations. Sound familiar? It mirrors human sleep rebound after deprivation. The brain insists on completing certain processes. And here's a quirky tidbit. Fruit flies deprived of sleep for extended periods eventually die. Not immediately, not dramatically, but survival declines. That's remarkable for an organism with a brain the size of a poppy seed. Sleep, or at least sleep-like states, are deeply conserved. Now bring it back to humans and the new discovery. If ripple bursts and synchronized energy surges are part of a sophisticated recalibration mechanism, then species with more complex cognitive demands might exhibit more elaborate versions of these patterns. Preliminary comparative research suggests that mammals with larger brains relative to body size tend to have more pronounced slow-wave activity. Correlation again, not definitive proof, but intriguing. You consider another animal, the octopus. The octopuses display sleep-like states with distinct active phases resembling REM. Their skin changes color and texture during these periods, as if they're dreaming in full-body technicolor. Researchers have observed neural activity shifts consistent with alternating quiet and active states. Historians still argue whether octopus dreaming is truly analogous to mammalian REM, but the parallel is striking. Even vastly different nervous systems converge on alternating states of quiet and activity. Why? Because processing while disconnected from immediate sensory input might be universally useful. You drift deeper into this cross-species tour and notice a pattern. Animals with high environmental demands, complex navigation, social interaction, learning, tend to exhibit structured sleep cycles. Predators sleep long hours but intensely. Grazers may sleep lightly but still show slow-wave patterns. Birds and marine mammals adapt the architecture but preserve core features. Slow oscillations, brief surges, rebound after deprivation. The fundamental rhythm persists, and that rhythm now appears more computational than restorative alone. There's even research suggesting that some rodents exhibit replay sequences, not only of past routes, but of potential future paths, what some call preplay. The hippocampus fires sequences representing trajectories the animal has never physically taken, but could plausibly take. That's predictive modeling. That's simulation. And it happens during rest. Historians still argue whether predictive coding is the brain's primary function or just one of many. But sleep data increasingly suggests that offline prediction refinement is central. Which means that across species, sleep might serve as a universal tuning mechanism, aligning internal models with lived experience. Humans, with our layered social systems and abstract thought, may require particularly intricate recalibration. Ripple bursts in our brains don't just encode spatial routes. They encode conversations, moral dilemmas, professional skills, subtle emotional cues. Your nightly recalibration might be more socially complex than a migrating bird's, but the underlying principle is similar. Disconnect from external input, synchronize neural networks, reorganize internal models, Reconnect by morning. The variations across species highlight something important. Sleep is adaptable, but not dispensable. You can modify it, split it, shorten it temporarily, but eliminate it entirely? Evolution hasn't found a way. One in which strengthens the sense that those hidden midnight surges, the ripple link bursts, the energy spikes, are performing something too crucial to skip. And if sleep architecture scales with cognitive complexity, then understanding your own nocturnal recalibration might reveal something fundamental about what it means to be human. Because if your brain is refining not just memory but self-modeling each night, then sleep isn't just biological maintenance, it's identity maintenance. And that brings us to an especially curious edge case, moments when awareness creeps back into sleep itself. What happens when the simulation becomes lucid? The curtain, it turns out, is thinner than anyone expected. For most of sleep science history, researchers relied on surface EEG, electrodes placed gently along the scalp, when reading broad electrical rhythms like weather satellites scanning cloud patterns. It was revolutionary in its time. It gave us REM. It gave us sleep stages. It gave us the tidy staircase you met earlier. But satellites can't see every streetlight. As technology advanced, high-density EEG grids, magnetoencephalography, intracranial electrodes used in epilepsy monitoring, ultra-fast fMRI, the resolution sharpened. And when resolution sharpens, simplicity fades. One of the most surprising discoveries of the past decade is how fragmented sleep truly is. Even in what appears to be stable slow-wave sleep, the brain exhibits micro-awakenings, brief shifts toward wake-like activity lasting just a few seconds. You don't remember them. You don't roll over dramatically. But at a neural level, networks flicker toward alertness and then settle back down. Mainstream fact: healthy adults can experience dozens of microarousals per hour without conscious awareness. These are detectable only through sensitive monitoring. Sleep, then, is not a continuous block. It's a mosaic. Historians still argue whether earlier models oversimplified sleep for clarity or whether technology is now revealing complexity that was always there. Likely both. With ultra-high-resolution imaging, researchers have observed that slow waves do not always sweep the entire brain uniformly. Instead, they can originate in one region and travel across cortical territories like a stadium wave, sometimes skipping sections. Local sleep inside global sleep. Remember the dolphins? It turns out humans may exhibit a softer version of regional independence. After intense learning in a specific cortical area, say, practicing a motor task with your right hand, subsequent slow-wave activity increases specifically in the corresponding left motor cortex region. Targeted recalibration. It's not the whole brain powering down equally. It's surgical. And here's where the new discovery becomes even more intricate. When researchers combine high-density EEG with precise timing analysis, they see ripple bursts aligning not just with global slow waves, but with local microstates, tiny windows where specific networks briefly synchronize at high frequency before dissolving again. Imagine zooming in on a supposedly calm ocean and discovering that beneath the surface, thousands of synchronized whirlpools form and vanish in perfect timing. There's also evidence that these microstates correlate with subtle shifts in autonomic activity, tiny changes in heart rhythm, breathing, even pupil diameter behind closed eyelids. Your body is quietly dancing to neural rhythms you never notice. A quirky tidbit: in sleep labs, some participants have shown brief, highly localized islands of wake-like gamma activity in sensory regions without regaining full consciousness. It's as if a patch of cortex wakes up, checks in, then goes back offline. Historians still argue whether such local wake events represent protective vigilance or mere noise, but their presence complicates the notion of sleep as a unified state. Now consider what this means for identity maintenance. If sleep consists of countless micro-events, slow waves rolling, ripples firing, energy surges flaring, micro-awakenings flickering, then the recalibration process is not one monolithic program. It's iterative, layered, adaptive. What one particularly striking study used auditory tones timed precisely to the phase of slow waves. When tones were delivered during the up phase, slow wave amplitude increased and memory performance improved the next day. Delivered at the wrong phase, the effect vanished. Timing is everything. That level of phase-specific sensitivity suggests the brain's nighttime processing is exquisitely coordinated. It's less like random maintenance and more like a symphony where missing a beat changes the outcome. And then there's the glymphatic system again. Fluid pulsing in sync with electrical silence. Recent imaging suggests that these fluid waves align with slow-wave oscillations so precisely that mechanical and electrical rhythms may be inseparable. Electricity guides fluid. Fluid influences cells. Cells adjust synapses. It's a loop. With the deeper scientists peer, the more sleep resembles a self-organizing system of nested oscillations, global rhythms containing local bursts, containing micro-adjustments. Not off, never off. Historians still argue whether future neuroscience will divide sleep into far more than the current handful of stages. Some researchers already propose substages within slow-wave sleep based on microstate patterns. What you call deep sleep might actually be dozens of subtly distinct computational windows. You lie there, blissfully unaware, cycling through these microstates. A ripple event integrates a memory fragment. A localized slow wave recalibrates a motor circuit. A brief gamma island flickers in a sensory area. Fluid pulses wash metabolic waste through expanding intercellular spaces. Then stillness. Then another wave. From the outside, you are unmoving. Inside, you are dynamic. The unsettling realization creeping through the field isn't that sleep is complex. It's that complexity was underestimated. If micro-awakenings and local wake states are normal, then consciousness may never fully disappear. It may dim, fragment, redistribute. And if recalibration occurs in phase-specific micro-windows, then the precision of sleep matters deeply. Disruptions, noise, stress, irregular schedules could subtly shift timing, altering integration quality in ways we're only beginning to understand, which leads to a gentle but profound thought. If the architecture of sleep is this intricate, this layered and sensitive, then your nightly rest is less like a shutdown and more like a finely tuned orchestration, a choreography of silence and surge. And as the tempo slows now, and as delta waves stretch longer and softer, the complexity remains, but the edges blur. Your breathing steadies, the flickers quiet, the brain's midnight orchestra plays on, but you don't need to follow every note. Because whether or not you understand the microstates, they hold you. They recalibrate you. They carry yesterday forward and soften its sharpest edges. The data may be unsettling in its precision, but the process itself is ancient and reliable. You drift. The waves roll gently. The hidden bursts align and dissolve. And somewhere between electricity and fluid, between silence and surge, your mind is being tuned for another morning. The night settles deeper now. All the surges, the ripples, the careful calibrations continue, but you don't need to analyze them anymore. You don't need to trace every oscillation or decode every microstate. The science can hum quietly in the background, like that soft fan you turned on earlier. Your brain knows what it's doing. It has known for millions of years. Slow waves rise and fall like a distant tide. Brief sparks of coordination flicker and fade. Memories soften at the edges. Emotions lose their sharpest corners. Somewhere inside, tiny networks align and realign, not to unsettle you, but to steady you. You are not unraveling in the dark. You are being gently tuned. The discoveries may sound dramatic in a lab at 2:43 a.m., glowing screens reflecting wide eyes and raised eyebrows. But here, in the quiet of your own rest, the process feels almost tender. Each ripple is a stitch. Each surge, a subtle adjustment. Each micro-awakening, a whisper of continuity between who you were today and who you will be tomorrow. Sleep is not an abyss, it is a bridge, a soft, rhythmic crossing between experience and understanding, between tension and release, between the noisy accumulation of the day and the quiet clarity of morning. So you let go. You let the slow waves carry you. You allow the hidden orchestra to play without supervision. You trust the ancient choreography of electricity and fluid, silence and spark. Outside, the world continues in low hums and distant lights. Inside, your mind drifts in steady tides. And whatever revisions unfold tonight, they unfold gently. You rest. The quiet inside your mind feels solitary, private, sealed behind bone and darkness. And yet, a provocative idea has begun drifting through sleep research circles. Softly at first, and then with growing curiosity. What if your sleeping brain is not entirely alone? Not in a mystical, telepathic sense? No glowing psychic beams crossing the suburbs at 3:12 a.m. Relax. But in a subtler, biological way. It begins with a simple, mainstream fact. Human brains synchronize with one another during wakefulness all the time. When two people have a conversation, their neural oscillations can align. Studies using hyperscanning EEG and fMRI, where two brains are recorded simultaneously, show that during cooperative tasks, storytelling, or even shared attention, certain brainwave frequencies become coupled. Your brain literally gets in sync with someone else's. Teachers and students, musicians playing together, couples finishing each other's sentences. Neural rhythms align in measurable ways. Historians still argue whether this synchrony reflects true information coupling or simply shared sensory input, but the phenomenon itself is well established. Now carry that into the night. If brains synchronize during shared wakeful experiences, what happens when groups sleep in proximity? Anthropologists note that for most of human history, people did not sleep alone in climate-controlled, acoustically isolated boxes. They slept in groups, families clustered around fires, small bands under shared shelters, entire households in single-room dwellings. Sleep was social. Even today, co-sleeping remains common in many cultures. Researchers began asking, do sleeping brains influence one another? At first, the idea seemed unnecessary. Sleep was assumed to be internally regulated. Circadian rhythms governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, unhomeostatic pressure building with wakefulness. End of story. But as measurement tools improved, subtle patterns emerged. In sleep labs where couples were recorded simultaneously, researchers noticed partial alignment in sleep stages. Partners often entered REM sleep within similar windows. Slow-wave activity sometimes rose and fell in overlapping cycles. Now, correlation does not prove causation. Shared routines, light exposure, and temperature all contribute to synchronized circadian timing. But in some experiments where environmental variables were controlled, microarousals and movement patterns still showed alignment between co-sleepers. Your sleeping body responds to the presence of another. Here's where it gets more intriguing. Respiratory rhythms, breathing patterns, can entrain between individuals. When two people lie close together, subtle cues like warmth, sound, and minute movements can lead to partial synchronization of breathing cycles. Breathing influences heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is linked to neural oscillations, and neural oscillations are the currency of sleep architecture. The chain is indirect but plausible. There's even a quirky tidbit from research on group chanting and meditation. When people engage in synchronized breathing practices, their brainwave patterns show increased coherence across participants. Some researchers have speculated that similar low-level entrainment might occur naturally in communal sleep settings. No shared dreams required, just shared rhythm. Historians still argue whether ancient reports of shared dreams reflect cultural storytelling or genuine psychological phenomena. Across civilizations, there are myths of collective dreaming, tribes interpreting dreams as communal messages, families believing they experience parallel visions. Science remains skeptical of literal shared dream content. There is no credible evidence that two brains exchange narrative imagery directly during sleep. But synchronization of physiological rhythms? That's measurable. Now layer this onto the new sleep discovery, the ripple bursts, the synchronized surges during deep sleep. If your brain's recalibration depends on precise timing of oscillations, and if those oscillations can be subtly influenced by external rhythms, like breathing, touch, or ambient noise, then co-sleeping might modulate aspects of neural processing. Not dramatically, not rewriting your identity based on your partner's dreams, but gently shifting timing windows. When studies of parents and infants, researchers have observed synchronized sleep stage transitions. A baby's arousal can precede a parent's by seconds, even before audible crying. It's as if the adult brain anticipates the infant's shift. Protective coupling, adaptive, evolutionarily sensible. But what about adults? Some data suggests that people sleeping next to a familiar partner experience slightly altered REM density compared to sleeping alone. The direction of the effect varies, sometimes more REM, sometimes fragmented REM, depending on relationship security and stress levels. Your emotional bond influences your sleep architecture. That's not mystical, that's attachment neurobiology. Here's where some speculative researchers take a cautious step further. If memory consolidation and emotional recalibration occur during ripple synchronized events, and if those events are sensitive to microarousals and physiological entrainment, then sleeping near others might subtly shape emotional processing through timing modulation, not through shared content, through shared rhythm. Historians still argue whether collective human experiences, rituals, synchronized dances, communal ceremonies, evolved partly because synchronized neural states strengthen social cohesion. If wakeful synchrony binds groups, perhaps nocturnal proximity reinforces bonds at a quieter level. There's even research suggesting that long-term couples exhibit increasing physiological synchrony over years: heart rate, cortisol patterns, even immune responses. Why would sleep be exempt? You lie there, imagining two people breathing softly beside each other. Slow waves roll through one brain. A subtle shift in mattress pressure triggers a microarousal in the other. Breathing patterns align briefly. Heart rhythms echo. Tiny adjustments ripple through neural timing. The recalibration continues, individual, yes, but gently influenced by shared environment. Now zoom out. Imagine entire early human groups sleeping near a common fire. The crackle provides rhythmic auditory input. Breathing, shifting, warmth, all shared. A loosely synchronized nocturnal ecosystem. No telepathy, no collective dream storyline, but a field of entrained biology. There's a fringe theory, more poetic than proven, that human social cohesion may be reinforced by shared sleep rhythms across communities. It's speculative, and mainstream science treats it cautiously. But the ingredients are there: oscillations, entrainment, recalibration, attachment. Sleep is not as isolated as it feels. Even alone in your room, your rhythms respond to distant traffic, heating systems, the subtle vibration of the world outside. You are an oscillator embedded in larger oscillatory systems. And the new discovery, the precision of ripple timing, the sensitivity to phase, suggests that even small shifts in rhythm could slightly modulate processing. Not enough to erase your individuality, but enough to hint that sleep is both personal and relational. You recalibrate nightly, sometimes in solitude, sometimes in proximity, always in rhythm. And if brains can align while awake and bodies can entrain while asleep, then perhaps the boundary between your neural night and the world around you is softer than you thought. Which raises another question. If sleep is so delicately tuned, what happens when we start engineering it deliberately? You've been thinking about sleep as recalibration, editing, simulation, synchronization. But there's another possibility, one that feels both simpler and more unsettling. What if sleep is defensive, not just restorative, not just computational, protective? Mainstream neuroscience already acknowledges one defensive role of sleep: immune regulation. During deep sleep, pro-inflammatory cytokines increase, supporting immune response. People deprived of sleep are more susceptible to infections. Vaccination studies show stronger antibody responses after adequate sleep. Your body literally fights better after rest. That's well established. But the defensive theory goes deeper than immunity. It suggests that sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep with its synchronized oscillations, protects the brain from overload. Consider your waking hours. You are constantly absorbing sensory input: light, sound, language, social cues, internal thoughts layered on top of it all. Every experience strengthens synaptic connections to some degree. Learning is, at the cellular level, synaptic potentiation. More connections, stronger signals. Now here's the mainstream fact that anchors this idea. During wakefulness, synaptic strength across the brain tends to increase globally. Studies in rodents show that markers of synaptic potentiation accumulate throughout the day. That's good for learning, but unchecked potentiation is dangerous. If every synapse only strengthened, neural networks would become saturated, noisy, energetically expensive, odd and unstable. Imagine turning up the volume on every instrument in an orchestra without ever adjusting levels. Eventually, it's just distortion. Enter the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis. Proposed in the early 2000s, this theory argues that sleep, especially slow-wave sleep, downscales synaptic strength globally, preserving relative differences while reducing overall intensity. In simpler terms, sleep lowers the gain so the system doesn't overload. Historians still argue whether downscaling is truly global or selectively targeted, but evidence supports some form of overnight renormalization. Now layer in the ripple bursts. If synchronized slow waves create windows for selective recalibration, some synapses weakened, others preserved or strengthened, then sleep isn't merely trimming excess. It's defending network stability. And that stability may be existential. There's a quirky tidbit from epilepsy research. Seizures often emerge from networks that are overly synchronized in pathological ways. During normal slow-wave sleep, synchronization is structured and rhythmic. But in certain disorders, that synchronization becomes excessive or mistimed. The difference between healthy oscillation and runaway excitation can be razor thin. Sleep may help maintain that balance. And here's where the defensive idea becomes more provocative. Some researchers have proposed that sleep protects against cognitive and emotional overload by periodically disconnecting the brain from continuous sensory input. You shut the gates. You lower the drawbridge. External stimuli are dampened. Thalamic gating reduces sensory transmission to the cortex during non-REM sleep. And it's not absolute. You can still wake to loud noises, but it's reduced. That sensory isolation creates a protected internal workspace. Historians still argue whether consciousness evolved primarily for external navigation or internal modeling. Sleep suggests internal modeling requires protected time. But what if that protection isn't optional? Modern life bombards you with information at an unprecedented scale. Artificial light extends wakefulness. Screens deliver endless novelty. Social media compresses social comparison into pocket-sized bursts. Your brain's predictive systems are constantly updating. Without nightly renormalization, those updates might accumulate maladaptively. Chronic sleep deprivation is linked to anxiety, mood disorders, impaired emotional regulation. Cortisol rhythms become dysregulated. When the amygdala becomes more reactive to negative stimuli after sleep loss, sometimes up to 60% more reactive in imaging studies. That's not subtle. Sleep appears to recalibrate emotional threat detection. Defensive, indeed. There's even emerging evidence that during deep sleep, certain neural firing patterns become less correlated, essentially reducing over-synchronization built up during the day. That decorrelation may prevent runaway positive feedback loops in neural circuits. Left unchecked, feedback loops can amplify fear, rumination, intrusive thoughts. You've likely felt this after poor sleep. Worries seem louder, irritations sharper, small problems balloon. Now imagine that state prolonged. The defensive theory proposes that slow-wave oscillations act like a nightly firewall, resetting excitability thresholds, reducing neural noise, preserving signal fidelity. The ripple bursts then might represent precise adjustments within that defensive framework, ensuring important connections survive while unnecessary ones weaken. It's not destruction, it's selective pruning, and pruning is protective. In developmental neuroscience, we know that children's brains undergo massive synaptic pruning during growth. Connections that are unused weaken and disappear. Those that are active strengthen. Historians still argue whether pruning is purely experience-driven or guided by intrinsic timing mechanisms. But the principle remains. Too many unchecked connections create chaos. Adults don't prune at childhood levels, but micro-pruning may occur nightly, which makes sleep less like a luxury and more like cybersecurity for your neural networks. There's a fringe extension of this theory suggesting that certain psychiatric conditions may involve dysregulated synaptic renormalization during sleep. If downscaling is insufficient, networks remain hyperactive. If excessive, important associations weaken too much. The evidence is still evolving, but the pattern is suggestive. You lie there deeply asleep. Slow waves sweep across your cortex. During each down state, neurons fall silent together, briefly reducing activity to near zero. During each upstate, coordinated firing resumes. Silence, surge, silence, surge. It's rhythmic inhibition, a patterned reset. The synchronized quiet might be as important as the bursts themselves, like hitting a system-wide pause button dozens of times per minute. Defensive not just against predators in the ancient night, or defensive against internal instability. And here's the subtle philosophical shift. If sleep evolved partly as a defense against neural overload, then consciousness itself may require periodic surrender to remain coherent. You cannot stay fully on indefinitely. The system degrades. And the new discovery, the intensity of ripple-linked recalibration, the precision of slow-wave timing, suggests that defense is active, not passive. Your brain doesn't simply power down, it actively prevents itself from becoming overwhelmed. Which raises a modern question. If sleep is a defensive recalibration system shaped by evolution under natural rhythms of light and darkness, what happens when we start trying to engineer it? If sleep is protective, if it recalibrates emotion, defends against overload, and gently rewrites memory, then one of its most powerful applications might be something deeply human: healing, specifically healing from emotional pain. You already know the everyday version of this. You go to bed heartbroken, furious, humiliated. You wake up and the feeling is still there, but dulled, manageable. Edges sanded down just enough that you can function. Mainstream neuroscience supports this experience. During REM sleep, the brain reactivates emotional memories while levels of stress-related neurotransmitters like norepinephrine are significantly reduced. Matthew Walker famously described REM as a kind of overnight therapy, where you revisit difficult experiences in a neurochemically safer environment. Historians still argue whether that phrase oversimplifies the process, but the core mechanism is well supported. REM sleep reduces the emotional intensity of prior experiences while preserving their informational content. You remember what happened. It just hurts less. But now layer in the newer findings: the ripple bursts during deep sleep, the coordinated surges, the micro-state precision. Emotional recalibration may not be limited to REM alone. Some recent studies suggest that non-REM slow-wave sleep also participates in emotional memory processing. When participants are exposed to emotionally charged images and then sleep, patterns of hippocampal cortical reactivation during slow-wave sleep predict how much their emotional response diminishes the next day. In other words, while deep sleep may prepare the emotional memory for REM's softer integration, a two-step process: cure it, reprocess. There's a quirky detail from trauma therapy research. People with PTSD often experience disrupted slow-wave sleep in addition to fragmented REM. It's not just bad dreams, it's altered architecture. Historians still argue whether these disruptions cause persistent trauma symptoms or result from them, but the link is robust. If slow-wave ripple events help reorganize memory traces and REM reduces emotional charge, then disrupted timing in either stage could interfere with healing. That realization has sparked experimental treatments. One approach involves targeted memory reactivation during sleep. In controlled studies, with specific sounds associated with positive or neutral reinterpretations of distressing memories are played softly during slow-wave sleep. Early results suggest this can slightly reduce emotional intensity the next day. The brain, it seems, can be nudged toward gentler rewrites, carefully, subtly. Another experimental direction involves transcranial stimulation, very low electrical currents applied during slow-wave sleep to enhance oscillation amplitude. Some studies show improved memory consolidation and possibly enhanced emotional regulation after such stimulation. We are tentatively learning how to amplify the brain's natural overnight therapy. But this is where the unease creeps in. If sleep rewrites emotional tone, and if we can influence that rewriting, then we are stepping into the editing suite of human identity. What happens if we overdo it? What if painful memories become too blunted? Pain, after all, serves purpose. It teaches caution, it shapes boundaries, it signals meaning. Historians still argue whether forgetting is a flaw of memory or a feature. From an evolutionary perspective, forgetting irrelevant or excessively distressing details may be adaptive, But total erasure would be dangerous. The ripple discovery suggests memory is not erased, but reweighted. And reweighting is powerful. Imagine two identical events experienced by two individuals. One sleeps deeply, with robust slow-wave activity and well-timed REM cycles. The other sleeps poorly, with fragmented architecture. The next morning, their emotional landscapes may differ, not because the event changed, but because the overnight integration did. Multiply that across years. Sleep quality could shape resilience. There's even research suggesting that adolescents, whose sleep cycles shift later, are particularly vulnerable to emotional dysregulation when chronically sleep deprived. Their brains are still undergoing heavy synaptic remodeling. Ripple events, slow waves, REM cycles, all highly active during teenage years. Disrupt that, and emotional processing may skew. You lie there, imagining a painful memory surfacing in deep sleep. The hippocampus triggers a compressed replay. The amygdala flickers. Slow waves create a synchronized window. Ripple bursts coordinate integration with broader cortical networks. Then a REM arrives. The scene plays again. Stranger now, symbolically transformed. The stress chemistry is dialed down. The narrative shifts slightly. By morning, the sting is softer. You don't feel the neural choreography. You just feel more able to continue. There's a fringe but growing speculation that future psychiatry may involve sleep prescriptions as seriously as medication, targeting architecture, timing, oscillatory strength. Already, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, improves not only sleep but depression and anxiety symptoms. The architecture matters. And here's the quiet, slightly off-field realization. Your brain has been performing this therapeutic recalibration every night for your entire life, without a therapist, without conscious effort, just waves and ripples and chemical shifts. The new discovery doesn't invent this process. It reveals its intricacy, the precision, the layered timing, and the fragility. Because if healing depends on synchronized oscillations and well-timed surges, then modern disruptions, light at midnight, stress at dawn, irregular schedules, may subtly erode that natural therapy. You may still sleep, but the orchestration might be off-tempo. Historians still argue whether industrialization reshaped human sleep more dramatically than any prior cultural shift. Artificial light extended the day. Work schedules fragmented the night. Evolution did not anticipate blue light at 11:37 p.m., and yet the brain tries to recalibrate anyway. Slow waves roll in, ripple bursts fire. Emotional tones soften where they can. You surrender to the night not just to rest, but to heal. Quietly, incrementally, imperfectly. And if sleep can dampen trauma, reshape emotional memory, and reinforce resilience, then perhaps its most powerful function isn't just computational, it's compassionate. Which makes the next question even more urgent. What happens when this delicate recalibration system begins to falter with age? You don't notice it happening at first. Sleep changes gradually across a lifetime, so slowly that it feels normal. Teenagers sleep like gravity has increased. Adults trim hours for work and responsibility. Older adults wake earlier, drift lighter, stir more often. But beneath those surface changes, something deeper shifts. Mainstream fact, slow-wave sleep declines significantly with age. By the time someone reaches their 60s or 70s, they may have 50 to 75% less deep slow-wave sleep compared to early adulthood. REM sleep also changes, though less dramatically. That matters, because slow-wave sleep is where those synchronized delta oscillations roll across the cortex. It's where ripple bursts align with cortical networks. It's where glymphatic clearance is most active, and it's where much of the recalibration seems to occur. Historians still argue whether reduced slow-wave sleep is a cause of cognitive aging or merely a symptom of it. But correlations are strong. In older adults, reduced slow-wave activity has been linked to poorer memory consolidation. Even more striking, studies have shown that diminished slow-wave sleep correlates with increased accumulation of beta-amyloid in the brain, the same protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. Remember the glymphatic system, the nighttime cleaning crew? It operates most efficiently during deep sleep. If slow-wave oscillations weaken, cerebrospinal fluid pulses may become less synchronized, less synchronization, less clearance, more accumulation. Now, it's not a simple one-to-one relationship. Historians still argue about causality in neurodegenerative disease, but the pattern is compelling enough that researchers are paying very close attention. There's even evidence suggesting a bidirectional loop. Amyloid buildup disrupts slow-wave sleep, and disrupted slow-wave sleep accelerates amyloid buildup. A feedback cycle. And that's unsettling, because if the ripple bursts and energy surges of deep sleep help maintain memory networks and clear metabolic waste, then weakening those processes with age could subtly destabilize identity maintenance itself. Memory lapses are common with aging. Names slip, details blur. That's normal to an extent. But when slow-wave architecture degrades substantially, the overnight consolidation and recalibration may become less efficient. You go to bed having learned something new. You wake up and it hasn't settled quite as firmly. There's a quirky tidbit from aging research. Older adults sometimes show local sleep intrusions during wakefulness. Brief, slow-wave-like activity in specific cortical regions, even while they appear awake. It's as if the brain is trying to compensate, performing micro-recalibrations on the fly. But daytime patches can't fully replace coordinated nighttime orchestration. Historians still argue whether modern lifestyles exacerbate age-related sleep decline. Increased nighttime light exposure, chronic stress, reduced physical activity, all can dampen slow-wave intensity. But even in optimal conditions, aging brains produce weaker delta waves. Now consider the ripple discovery. What if high-frequency bursts nested within slow waves help reorganize memory networks? And if slow-wave amplitude diminishes with age, then ripple timing may degrade as well. Timing is everything. Misaligned surges could mean less efficient integration. That doesn't mean the system collapses overnight. It means gradual drift, like an orchestra playing beautifully for decades, then slowly losing tempo cohesion. There's emerging research exploring whether enhancing slow-wave sleep in older adults can improve memory performance. In some experiments, auditory stimulation timed to the up phase of slow waves increased their amplitude and improved next-day recall modestly. It's early, but promising. You imagine an aging brain entering deep sleep. The waves are shallower, the surges less pronounced, the glymphatic pulses slightly weaker. Show me the system still functions, just less robustly. And yet, here's the hopeful counterpoint. The brain remains plastic across the lifespan. Exercise increases slow-wave sleep intensity. Learning new skills can enhance local slow-wave activity in engaged regions. Good sleep hygiene supports architecture even in later years. The recalibration system weakens, but it doesn't vanish. Historians still argue whether neurodegenerative diseases begin decades before symptoms appear. If so, sleep disturbances might be early warning signs rather than consequences. That possibility has sparked a wave of research into sleep as both diagnostic window and intervention target. Because if sleep protects neural stability, clearing waste, renormalizing synapses, when integrating memory, then preserving sleep quality could be one of the most accessible defenses against cognitive decline. The ripple bursts, once thought trivial anomalies, now look central. Not just for learning, for maintenance, for continuity. You lie there thinking about the future version of yourself, the older brain still drifting through slow waves each night, perhaps fewer, perhaps softer, but still oscillating. The nightly recalibration never stops entirely. Identity remains iterative, and that realization carries both gravity and reassurance. Sleep shapes you daily, across decades, quietly defending coherence in the face of accumulating experience. The new discovery does not promise immortality of memory, but it reveals the mechanism that keeps memory coherent as long as it can, which makes the next frontier both exciting and slightly nerve-wracking. If we understand these oscillations well enough, can we engineer them? If you understand a system well enough, the next human impulse is almost predictable. Can we optimize it, hack it, upgrade it? Sleep, once seen as idle time, has quietly become one of the most tempting frontiers for bioengineering. If ripple bursts refine memory, if slow waves defend against overload, if REM recalibrates emotion, Then amplifying or sculpting those processes could, in theory, enhance learning, resilience, even longevity. Mainstream science has already taken the first cautious steps. One of the simplest methods involves sound. Researchers have discovered that playing soft auditory tones precisely timed to the up phase of slow waves can increase their amplitude. If the tones are gentle, barely audible, and delivered only when EEG detects the correct phase. The result? Stronger, slow-wave activity and modest improvements in memory consolidation the next day. Timing is crucial. Deliver the tone at the wrong phase and nothing happens. Deliver it correctly and the oscillation grows. It's like nudging a swing at exactly the right moment. There's also transcranial electrical stimulation. Very low currents applied through the scalp during deep sleep. Some studies have shown enhanced slow-wave oscillations and improved declarative memory performance after stimulation. The currents are weak, safe within research limits. But the principle is clear. The sleeping brain can be modulated from the outside. Historians still argue whether such interventions represent natural enhancement or artificial interference. But the line between the two blurs quickly in modern neuroscience. Then there's pharmacology. Certain medications alter sleep architecture dramatically. Some antidepressants suppress REM sleep, others increase slow-wave activity. Sedatives can induce unconsciousness, but unconsciousness is not the same as natural sleep. Here's a critical mainstream fact. Many sedative drugs reduce slow-wave oscillation quality, even if total sleep time increases. You may be unconscious longer, but the recalibration choreography is altered. Quantity does not equal quality. That realization alone has shifted clinical thinking. Sleep is not merely about duration, it's about architecture. Now imagine future technologies. Closed-loop systems already exist in labs. EEG devices detect ripple events or slow-wave phases in real time and deliver precisely timed stimulation to enhance or suppress specific oscillations. In rodents, researchers have disrupted hippocampal ripple events during sleep and observed impaired memory the next day. Conversely, enhancing certain oscillatory patterns can strengthen specific learned tasks. The implications are staggering. If we can identify which ripple sequences correspond to which memories, and we are not there yet, but inching closer, could we selectively strengthen or weaken them? It sounds like science fiction, but early building blocks are present. There's a quirky tidbit from DARPA-funded research. Military programs have explored targeted memory reactivation during sleep to accelerate skill learning. The results remain limited and far from magical, but the interest signals something important. Sleep is no longer just a biological necessity, it's a potential tool. Historians still argue whether every major technological leap brings unintended consequences. Agriculture reshaped disease patterns. Industrialization reshaped sleep itself. Digital technology reshaped attention. If we begin reshaping sleep deliberately, what shifts follow? Consider emotional recalibration. If REM reduces emotional intensity of painful memories, could enhancing REM blunt trauma more quickly? Possibly. But could excessive dampening reduce emotional salience necessary for growth? Also possible. Emotion is not an error to be deleted, it's information. Then there's the ethical edge. If sleep engineering improves learning efficiency, who gets access? Students? So athletes? Corporations? Militaries? Could competitive pressure emerge to optimize nightly recalibration for performance gains? The brain's most vulnerable state becomes a marketplace. You lie there imagining a future bedroom, not dark and quiet, but softly humming with closed-loop neurofeedback systems. A wearable headband tracking delta waves, gentle pulses delivered at precise microsecond intervals. Algorithms optimizing ripple timing for peak cognitive output. It sounds sleek and slightly invasive, because the new sleep discovery reveals that identity is shaped nightly by processes you do not consciously supervise. If external systems begin influencing those processes, even subtly, then the authorship of identity becomes shared. Not dramatically, not overnight, but incrementally. Historians still argue whether enhancement technologies ultimately widen inequality or democratize opportunity. Sleep engineering could do either. Yet there's another possibility. Perhaps understanding sleep more deeply will encourage protection rather than exploitation. Perhaps realizing how delicate and intricate the oscillatory choreography is will inspire preservation. Dark rooms, consistent schedules, respect for circadian rhythms. Not every system needs upgrading. Some need safeguarding. The ripple bursts and synchronized surges are ancient. They evolved without silicon chips and machine learning models. They already perform astonishing recalibration. The temptation to optimize must be balanced with humility. Because the more precisely we map sleep's architecture, the clearer it becomes that even small timing shifts can alter integration outcomes. Precision cuts both ways. Enhance wisely or destabilize subtly. You remain in the dark, unmodified, organic, oscillating naturally. Slow waves roll, ripples fire, energy surges flare and dissolve. For now, the system belongs entirely to biology, but the tools to intervene are growing sharper, and not all scientists feel entirely comfortable with that, which leads us to the unease behind the headlines, the quiet concerns echoing in conference halls and research papers. By now, the lab lights feel softer, not because the science is less sharp, but because the implications are heavier. When the first data sets revealed those coordinated ripple bursts nested inside slow waves, most researchers felt excitement. Discovery is oxygen in science. Oh, but as replication piled up, across labs, across populations, across species, a quieter reaction began to surface. Unease, not fear in a cinematic sense. No alarms blaring, no emergency meetings, just thoughtful pauses, longer discussions at conferences, sentences that begin with, "If this holds up." Mainstream science is comfortable with sleep being restorative, even with it being computational. But the idea that sleep is a primary architect of emotional tone, predictive modeling, and identity weighting, that's bigger. Because it means the most formative adjustments to your mental world occur when you are least able to consent to them. You don't supervise which memories are softened. You don't approve which associations are strengthened. The recalibration runs automatically. Historians still argue whether free will is best understood as moment-to-moment choice or as a product of deeper unconscious processes. Sleep research leans heavily toward the latter. You wake up believing your thoughts are entirely your own, and they are, but they have been tuned overnight by oscillations you never witnessed. For most scientists, that's fascinating. For some, it's destabilizing. Then there's the mental health dimension. If ripple timing and slow-wave synchronization shape emotional recalibration, what happens in disorders where oscillations are disrupted? Depression, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, all show altered sleep architecture. Are those alterations symptoms, causes, feedback loops? Historians still argue whether psychiatric diagnoses reflect discrete diseases or clusters of dysregulated processes. Because sleep architecture may be one of those foundational processes. And if that's true, intervening in sleep could mean intervening in personality. That carries ethical weight. There's also the social implication. Modern society systematically erodes sleep, shift work, artificial light, economic pressure, digital distraction. If nightly recalibration is essential for emotional stability and cognitive flexibility, then chronic sleep deprivation isn't just a productivity issue. It's a public mental health variable, subtle, cumulative, invisible. Imagine millions of brains missing optimal, ripple-synchronized recalibration for years. Emotional reactivity might increase slightly. Cognitive rigidity might creep upward. Empathy modulation might shift. Not dramatically enough to headline, but enough to matter. A quirky detail from large-scale population studies. Regions with higher rates of chronic sleep deprivation correlate with higher accident rates, mood disorder prevalence, and even interpersonal conflict markers. Correlation, not causation, but patterns invite scrutiny. Some researchers quietly wonder whether sleep disruption at scale subtly shapes culture. Historians still argue whether industrialization altered human temperament as much as it altered labor. Sleep may be part of that story. Then there's the enhancement question again. If we can strengthen ripple events to improve memory, could that widen cognitive gaps between those with access and those without? Could sleep optimization become another axis of inequality? The lab discussions grow philosophical. Sleep was once considered private and simple. Now it appears intricate and foundational. And the more foundational a system is, the more carefully it must be handled. There's also a deeply human discomfort in recognizing that your sense of continuity, your stable self, is maintained by processes you do not consciously control. You feel like the author of your story, but sleep is the editor, a compassionate editor perhaps, one that softens trauma, strengthens learning, defends against overload. Still an editor. Historians still argue whether the self is a stable entity or an emergent process updated continuously. Sleep science increasingly supports the emergent view. Each night, delta waves roll, ripple bursts fire, emotional weights shift. By morning, you are you, but slightly recalibrated. That realization doesn't remove agency. It contextualizes it. How you make choices during the day. Your brain refines the consequences at night. The unease among scientists is not about danger. It's about depth. We may have underestimated how central sleep is, not as downtime, but as a primary maintenance system for coherence, resilience, and identity integration. If that system falters, ripple timing misaligns, slow waves fragment, REM destabilizes, then the self may fray subtly at the edges. And if we intervene carelessly, trying to optimize without understanding full systemic balance, we risk altering more than memory scores. We risk altering narrative tone. You lie there, breathing slowly, unaware of the philosophical gravity hidden inside your nightly rhythms. Sleep feels simple, but under the surface, it is one of the most sophisticated processes your biology performs. And the scientists are not afraid of sleep itself. They are humbled by it, because the more precisely we measure, the clearer it becomes. The night is not passive, it is formative. And that leaves one final question lingering in the dark. What does all of this mean for you? You're still here, breathing slowly, heart steady, brain oscillating in rhythms older than language. After everything we've wandered through, the ripple bursts, the synchronized surges, the micro awakenings, the emotional recalibrations, the final question is not abstract anymore. It's personal. What does this mean for you? Mainstream science offers the simplest starting point. Sleep is not optional maintenance. It is a foundational biological process essential for memory consolidation, on emotional regulation, immune function, metabolic balance, and neural stability. That alone is enough to respect it, but the newer discoveries deepen that respect. If slow-wave oscillations create precise windows for recalibration, if ripple bursts selectively reorganize memory networks, if REM simulations soften emotional charge and test future scenarios, if microstates and fluid pulses align in intricate choreography, then every night you undergo a quiet transformation, not dramatic, not destabilizing, subtle, iterative. Historians still argue whether identity is continuous or reconstructed moment by moment. Sleep suggests it is both. You carry forward continuity, but it is refreshed nightly through synchronized recalibration. You are stable because you are updated. That realization isn't meant to unsettle you. It's meant to empower you. Because if sleep is this central, this formative, then protecting it becomes one of the simplest, most powerful decisions you can make for your future self. You don't need a neurostimulation headband. You don't need ripple-enhancing algorithms. You need darkness, consistency, enough time. Mainstream research shows that regular sleep schedules strengthen slow-wave integrity. Physical exercise increases deep sleep intensity. Reducing late-night light exposure supports REM timing. Simple behaviors, profound impact. There's a quirky historical detail worth remembering. Before electric light became widespread in the late 19th century, average sleep duration appears to have been longer and more aligned with sunset and sunrise. Historians still argue about exact numbers, but artificial illumination undeniably reshaped circadian rhythms. Modern life nudges you away from biological timing. Your brain still tries to recalibrate anyway. But when you cut sleep short repeatedly, you are not just losing rest. You are trimming recalibration cycles. You are reducing opportunities for emotional smoothing. You are weakening nightly defense against overload, not catastrophically in one night, cumulatively over years. And here's the gentlest, most reassuring truth hidden inside all of this science. Your brain wants to keep you coherent. The ripple bursts are not random. The slow waves are not decorative. The REM dreams are not wasted imagination. They are part of a deeply conserved system that has carried humans through ice ages, migrations, heartbreak, invention, loss, love, war, and art. You are held by that system every night, even when you don't notice, even when sleep feels imperfect, even when you wake at 3:17 a.m. staring at the ceiling. The recalibration still happens in fragments. Microstates still flicker. Oscillations still roll. And the fact that scientists are humbled, occasionally unsettled by the precision of this process does not mean it is dangerous. It means it is extraordinary. You are not losing control each night. You are surrendering to maintenance. You are allowing the editor to smooth the manuscript. You are giving your predictive brain space to reorganize. Sleep does not erase you. It preserves you by refining you. Historians still argue whether humanity's greatest leaps came from waking insight or dream-born synthesis. Perhaps the answer is both. Perhaps the nightly oscillations that reshape memory networks quietly fuel the creativity and resilience you express in daylight. The new discovery, the synchronized ripple choreography, does not demand fear. It invites respect. So tonight, when you close your eyes, you might imagine the slow waves beginning their patient roll across your cortex. You might picture the ripple bursts flashing like distant lightning within a calm sea. You might even smile at the thought that somewhere deep inside, a tiny committee of neurons is carefully deciding how strongly yesterday should echo into tomorrow. And then you let go, because you don't need to supervise it. You don't need to micromanage delta waves. You don't need to audit ripple timing. You need only to rest. The night is not empty. It is active in your favor. And as your breathing slows, as your muscles soften, as the outside world dims into quiet hums and distant lights, your brain begins its ancient choreography once more. Silence, surge, integration, release. You drift. Slow waves rise. Ripples align. The manuscript softens at the edges. And by morning, you will wake, still yourself. Just slightly, beautifully recalibrated. Word count, 1072. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into the quiet confidence that your brain knows how to carry you forward. Let the waves do their work. Let the editor revise gently. Let the night hold you.